Thanks for selling your car to Carvana. Here's your check.
Whoa, when did I get here?
What do you mean?
I swear it was just moments ago that I accepted a great offer from Carvana online. I must have time traveled to the future.
It was just moments ago. We do same-day pickup. Here's your check for that great offer.
It is the future.
It's the present and just the convenience of Carvana. Sorry to blow your mind.
It's all good. Happens all the time.
Sell your car the convenient way to
Carvana.
Pickup times may vary and fees may apply.
Cheers, Rockets fans. Welcome to The Logger Line, an exclusive podcast from the home of the Rockets.
Whoa!
Sports Talk 790.
Rockets!
The Logger Line is proudly served to you by Carbox Clutch City Lager.
It is good!
Oh, yeah? Red Nation, get ready. Get ready. Get ready. The Logger Line starts now.
Welcome aboard.
Thanks for checking out another new episode of The Logger Line, again served to you courtesy of Clutch City Lager of Carbach Brewing. I'm Ben DuBose, your host, editor of USA Today's Rockets Wire, and a contributor to Sports Talk 790, official flagship radio station of your Houston Rockets. Our usual co-host and producer, Paolo Alves, couldn't be here tonight, but I'm hosting the show nonetheless because there's a lot to talk about with your Houston Rockets. Honestly, it's been a fantastic week since we last recorded. You have to look at the macro first, and the Rockets are now 44-25. They've won 7 straight games, longest winning streak of the season, just wrapped up a perfect 6-0 homestand, during which they moved up from number 5 in the Western Conference standings to their current spot at number 2. By the way, Rockets are now 26-10 at Houston this season. That's the 4th best home record in the entire NBA. So knowing that, it might make holding on to that number 2 seed even more important, since it puts you in line to have home court advantage in at least the first 2 rounds of the playoffs, assuming you advance. Now, with all that said, I do want to start by acknowledging the elephant in the room, and that's that every team they played in this winning streak currently has a losing record. And while Monday's game against Philly was absolutely insane and tied for the greatest comeback in franchise history, the reality is they also shouldn't have been down 25 points to a severely shorthanded Sixers team in the first place. So while certainly good, and this run has made them pretty much a playoff lock for the first time in 5 years, let's keep it in perspective. Beating the Bulls and the Sixers by less than 5 points, well, the Sixers game ended up being a 7-point margin, but come on, it was overtime. The point is, it's not the January stretch where you were going out and beating the Cavs twice, the Grizzlies twice, the Celtics on the road. By and large, this is just taking care of business at home against the teams you're supposed to beat. Even without Ben Thompson, who, by the way, it sounds like he should be back from his ankle sprain within the next few days. But even without him in, the Rockets are just better than these teams. And so there's no parade here. They're just simply doing what they should do. But before I look into some of the more serious implications of what we've seen in recent days, I want to start by talking about and highlighting just how absurd that Philly game actually was. Because for me, guys, I'm 40 years old. I really think that was one of the 5 or so most bizarre sports games that I've ever seen. Just think about all that happened in that one. You fell behind by 25 points to a team consisting of mostly G-Leaguers, yet to their credit, they sure didn't play like it. They shot 15 of 24 on threes in the first half. You'd legit be stunned if the 2017 Golden State Warriors went out and did that against a bad team. Quentin Grimes was playing like James Harden on the Unguardable tour. Then you had the Rockets overcoming the 25-point deficit in less than a quarter, only to have it balloon back to 10 in 2 minutes. Jalen Green got a shoving technical. They had 2 players get ejected in Tari Eason and Fred VanVleet. And by the way, the whole storyline with Fred was just ridiculous on so many levels. Basically a 7-point swing on bad officiating with under 90 seconds to go. And then somehow they erase an 8-point deficit with under a minute left. Your all-star center in Alperen Sengun, who got benched for defensive purposes because the Sixers were just so ridiculously and inexplicably good at playing 5 out, came back in, got the tying bucket almost at the buzzer on a perfectly missed free throw by Jabari Smith Jr. In his post-game press conference, Ime Udoka called it one of the best misses he's ever seen. Then in overtime, you had Sengun immediately playing great after basically being benched for a quarter and a half. Dillon fouled out, and so at that point, when you lost Dillon Brooks, you were down 4 players. You had the 2 ejected guys, Dillon, and also Amen Thompson, because he was hurt. Sengun got called for one of the worst travels in NBA history when the ball was clearly dislodged on his drive. Rockets were close to putting the game away, and Patrick Fertitta courtside was as demonstratively angry as I've ever seen the guy. By the way, at least the NBA did own up to that mistake in their last 2-minute report. It's not much consolation, but I guess it's better than nothing. And then the cherry on top of the shit Sunday, with under 2 minutes left and the Rockets up 3, the refs were about to put Philly on the line for a non-shooting foul before the Toyota Center PA announcer, our good buddy Jonathan Sanford, guy put on a Superman cape and loudly announced to the crowd that the Sixers were not over the foul limit and that it was a side out. Eventually they got it right. Sixers ended up missing on that possession. The Rockets went down and scored and ultimately won the game. So I don't want to make a mountain out of a molehill out of that one game because the Rockets were favored by 16 for a reason. It's not one that's going to go on your Mount Rushmore of favorite wins as a fan. But just in terms of entertainment value, that was one of the strangest games that I have ever seen. And because of that, one of the most memorable ones as well. And for me, at least, it's always more memorable if you win. Anyway, the 2 guys I want to spotlight on this mini pod, which will be just me in Paolo's absence, are Jalen Green and Jabari Smith Jr. I'm not too focused on the Sengun angle. I know on social media, anything involving Alpi always gets turned into a thing, but I really think this was an outlier on a few levels. I think certainly the way the Sixers were playing and shooting challenged a lot of the Rockets. I think I have seen some discussion of why was Sengun the only guy who got benched. I think a lot of it came down to not just the defensive struggles against 5 out, but that the Rockets down 25 points felt like they needed more spacing and shooting themselves on offense to overcome that. And even though Philly ended up making 24 threes, I believe the Rockets made 22. And they needed basically all of them. And so I think this was a situation where once the Rockets were down that much in the second half, Ime Udoka not just wanted the smaller lineup for defensive purposes and switching, but he also wanted it for the sake of having more ability to shoot threes at volume offensively. It was going to be tough to get back in the game just playing through Alperen Sengun on the low block once you fell down by that amount with just 20 or so minutes left to play. So I think this was just a perfect storm outlier on a few levels, and I wouldn't read too much into it, especially because Sengun had a good week before it. It was just a weird matchup. The Sixers had no traditional big men because they had 11 players out due to injury. Yet another storyline there, Rockets playing basically a G League team, which is why they were favored by 16 over a Philly team that entered the season with championship aspirations. They're obviously a shell of that right now, but boy, what a bizarre game that was on every level. And I just think for Sengun, I know there was frustration. You can see, some of the body language towards the end of the game. It's not nothing, but I tend to think once the Rockets get going tonight in Orlando, that this will be a footnote. This was an outlier. He's been playing well. He's been on an upward trajectory really since the All-Star break. This was just a bizarre matchup on a number of levels, and Ime Udoka rode the hot hand. And this is nothing new. I've seen some talk of why didn't the Rockets go back to Sengun early in the fourth quarter? We've seen this time and time again. Think the 2 Warriors games where the Rockets came back from huge deficits. Didn't win either of them, but nearly did, playing guys like Nate Williams and Jayshawn Tate, who, by the way, against the Sixers was plus 30 in 22 minutes. That speaks to just how much the Rockets needed someone who had the right competitive spirit and energy. I think to some degree, Rockets were just on fumes playing their 3rd game in 4 nights and probably overlooked the Sixers a little bit as well. Jayshawn Tate is a true pro. He's someone that you can trust to at least take the game seriously, and he has fresh legs because he hasn't been playing a lot in recent weeks. And so I think that shows just how effective the smaller lineup was. And I tend to think as far as Sengun, it's an outlier. He's been better since the All-Star break. Just a weird game on many levels. And once you get back to a more traditional lineup and a more traditional opponent, which I think the Magic tonight will be. Magic have one of the top 4 defenses in the NBA along with the Rockets. I think we'll look back at the Philly game as a memorable, hilarious, and at times maddening outlier, but an outlier nonetheless. So in terms of how it went down with Sengun in particular, it's not something that's going to go on his career highlight reel, but I don't think it's a huge red flag either. Just one of those weird things that happens to everybody. I can remember when James Harden was at or near his peak, he had a few games where Mike D'Antoni didn't close with him for one reason or another. This stuff just happens over 82 games. March can be sort of funny in the NBA because of all the weird dynamics, rosters constantly shifting, teams trying to load manage a little bit, getting ready for the playoffs. And fortunately, the Rockets just found a way to get the win. And to Sengun's credit, even though he didn't play for most of the second half, when they were running out of bodies in overtime, he did step up, played very well, and had a key role in getting the Rockets to the finish line. So kudos to him for that. Anyway, for me, the big story in this Philly game, and really for the win streak overall, is Jalen Green. I want to start there because if you go back to our archives and you listen to our shows right after the Amin injury a week or so ago, there was a conversation I shared that I had with someone inside the building who had made the case that Jalen and Sengun were the 2 X factors during this stretch without Amin. My personal inclination going into it was to say Tari Eason, because obviously he's the closest analog to Amin in terms of style of play, ended up being Amin's direct replacement in the starting lineup. But the way the Rockets were looking at it is that Tari, for the most part, is somebody who just does what he does. And you're just asking him to scale up his minutes a little bit. It's Jalen and Alpi who are the variables. And then when you lose Amin, probably your best overall player, a huge floor raiser because he's so good as a two-way guy, you really need your ceiling guys to hit to offset that. And that's generally what's happened with both of those guys having a big week when their team needed them. Again, I think the Sengun game against the Sixers was an outlier for a few reasons. And aside from that, he's been very good since the All-Star break. But with Jalen, I think what we saw from that game and really throughout the past week, it's been special, particularly in light of some of the weaknesses that he had early in his career. So I read the numbers. The last 4 games, Jalen is averaging 27.6 points, 7.3 rebounds, 6.3 assists, over 44% shooting, almost 39% on threes. Rockets are obviously 4-0, and Jalen is plus 15.5 in his minutes. I should note that coincides with the return of Fred, and I do think that Fred's generally very good at getting Jalen and basically everybody the ball in the right spots, the right moments, right time on the clock, those types of factors. There's a reason we saw the numbers without Fred dip much more offensively than defensively. But with Jalen specifically, there's just been a few really encouraging things. We know one of the big criticisms of him, at least at times, it's been the assist to turnover ratio. Well, in this stretch, he's at 6.3 assists and just 2.3 turnovers, and he had a career-high 13 assists against Philly. He's getting his teammates involved. He's doing it without excessively turning the ball over. And in fact, you could argue that the stretch without Fred may have better positioned Jalen to thrive as the lead ball handler, and that he got more used to doing the heavy lifting. And now that makes it easier for him to sort of take advantage of Fred's gravity as a shooter and whatnot, because Fred draws more attention than anyone else on that Houston roster from a shooting perspective. And then beyond the assist, I think it's clear, the defense and the rebounding, those are continuing to improve. The plus minus at better than plus 15, that speaks for itself. The rebounding over 7 per game, including against the Bulls, the winning putback with 15 seconds to play. By the way, say what you will about Chicago, but they're inside the playing field in the East. They had won 4 straight games going in, and Jalen was lights out to close that game, certainly in terms of making shots, but also in terms of making passes and even crashing the glass, pretty much whatever his team needed down the stretch. And to me, the most important thing of all, he just looks like a much tougher player physically, but also mentally. And that's where Monday comes into play because it ties into a broader trend. He was dreadful in that first half against Philly. I think some of it may have been that, he took a knee to the calf from Quentin Grimes early in that game and he was limping around some. But whatever the reason, he was terrible. 5 points, 4 assists, 2 of 11 shooting. The defense from everybody was terrible. There's a reason the Sixers put up 78 points in the first half. And then from halftime onward, he was brilliant. all NBA level. 25 points, 9 assists in the second half and overtime, shot better than 50% overall, and 45% from three. Guys, that's not easy to do. We've seen in the past that Jalen can sort of shrug his shoulders and accept that it's just not his night when stuff goes poorly. It's something that even James Harden, at the peak of his powers, still had a tendency to do. And yet it doesn't feel like Jalen's doing that anymore. That's what a true alpha in the NBA needs to do, or not do in this case. The highs have always been there, and, to that point, the Rockets are now 10-0 this season when he scores at least 30 points. But the issue has always been about mitigating the lows, and that's what it looks like to me is finally happening. His critics have always made the point that the good stretches are unsustainable because they depend on him shooting at a level that he can't consistently do at volume. But now the formula is getting a lot more diverse. So to circle back to the original point, the person I talked to made the point that Jalen and Sengun were the guys who really needed to answer the bell after men got hurt. Your two fourth-year guys that are in position to make the leap. What we all hoped for going into the season, especially after they got their big contracts. And Jalen responded with maybe his best week of the entire season. Even the Orlando game before that, which was the first that Amen missed due to injury, I know it wasn't great overall from an efficiency perspective, but he had 12, 5, and 5 in the first half on great efficiency against an elite defense, and that's what let the Rockets play with a lead almost the entire time. And so that's why I think that all of this is so encouraging, because what it all comes down to is that Jalen is becoming a much more well-rounded player, and he's not having those extreme peaks and valleys. He's providing value in areas other than scoring. He's not turning the ball over as much. He's doing it against both bad and good defenses. We still don't know exactly what Jalen's going to look like as a finished product, whether he can consistently tap into that all-star, even all-NBA level gear. But what I do know, and what I do like heading into the playoffs, is that it feels like the games where he's a zero, those are pretty much gone. He's finding ways to consistently make an impact, and honestly, that's been the thing that's held him back for most of his career. And yeah, you can say that this winning streak has all come against sub-500 teams. Fair. But being able to stack good games, that's not easy to do no matter who you play. You look at Monday's game against the Sixers, third game in 4 nights, lots of tanks were on empty. Jalen clearly was limping around early in the game after bruising his calf. He had the sleeve on it, so I'm guessing it sort of hit at what was already at issue. And yet he was out there playing over 45 minutes, gave it everything he had. He only sat out 2 minutes in the second half and overtime combined. I think it was those 2 minutes at the start of the fourth where the Sixers pushed what was a tie game back out to 10, and the Rockets realized, well, we can't function without Jalen. We got to put him back out there, and he delivered. He left everything on the floor. And so I think what you're seeing at 23 years old, he's just a much more mature, confident, and consistent player relative to the first 3, even 3.5 seasons of his NBA career. And if you get that version of Jalen combined with a top 5 defense, you've got a chance against pretty much anybody you can potentially play in the playoffs. Maybe the Thunder are the lone exception just because they're insanely good, but who knows? Maybe you get lucky and you don't even draw them. I think I'll defer the playoff talk for later in the month when the standings become more clear. By the way, aside from the Rockets getting to 2, the fact that both the Warriors and Timberwolves had a loss put on their ledgers on Monday night was huge, giving the Rockets another game of separation relative to teams at 6 and 7 and potentially the play-in range. Again, at this point, the Rockets have built up a buffer to the point where they shouldn't be sweating it down the home stretch of the year, at least getting in the playoffs. The more difficult close to the season is going to be more relative to what seed they are in the top 6 and who they potentially play. And so there's going to be some interesting discussions about where the Rockets should go to optimize their success or their chances at success in the playoffs. And again, I'll table that for a show later in the month with Paolo because I want to get, more intel about how the standings look. There's still a lot of volatility all the way from 2 down to 7. There's not a huge degree of separation. And also, the Rockets are getting to a point where their home success is hard to ignore. So you're 26 and 10 at home, but just 18 and 15 on the road. And the splits are getting larger as the year progresses. They just wrapped up a perfect 6-0 homestand. They had that terrible road losing streak early in February. At some point, even if it's a tougher matchup, if you can get in line to host not just one, but at least two playoff series to have home court advantage, game 1, game 2, game 5, game 7, if the Rockets continue to be that much better at home, and Jabari gave a shout out to the fans at Tudison, or more on Jabari in just a second, after Monday's game, that's something that can't be dismissed. We're not there yet. We'll see how the Rockets fare. They do have some road games coming up, including 2 in Florida this week against the Magic and the Heat. So perhaps the Rockets get some victories on the road. But I do think even if the matchup in round 1 is a little more difficult, if you can get home court advantage and potentially be on the other side of the bracket from the Thunder, so that the Thunder have to play 2 rounds before you could have to go up against them. And who knows, maybe you get lucky and they somehow lose, or they have an injury or two in those first 2 rounds. Maybe something happens to where either you don't face them. Think the Seattle Supersonics, when the Rockets made their first championship run in 94, they were the 1 seed. Nobody thought they could beat them. Well, they lost to the 8 seed in round 1, and the rest is history. Not saying that's going to happen, but if you're on the opposite side of the bracket from the Thunder and you can't play them until at least the conference finals, crazier things have happened. And so getting on the opposite side of the bracket from OKC and getting home court advantage in at least 1 round, that may be something for the Rockets to consider as they get down the home stretch of this season, even if it draws them what could be a slightly tougher matchup in round 1, a team like Golden State or Minnesota. Not saying it's a slam dunk case, just something that as the Rockets continue to stack home wins, and with the Thunder looking as great as they do, it might be something to consider. But I'll do a deeper dive on that later in the month with Paolo, so we can get multiple perspectives and we can get a little more concrete intel as far as what the standings are looking like and what the various options are, depending on, are the Rockets at 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6. And so at that point, the Rockets will have a much better idea of, if we load manage, so to speak, in a couple of games, what the likely draw would be if they fall back a seed or 2, or conversely, if they go balls to the wall to try and win every game, well, what the reward would be if they actually get to the 2 line. And by the way, I should point out that if the Rockets are the 2, it's not a guarantee that they would play the Timberwolves because of the play-in tournament. If the Timberwolves play at 7, or stay at 7, or the Warriors, if they drop to 7 and fall below the Timberwolves, because the 7 plays the 8, you could easily have the 8 seed, which right now is the LA Clippers. James Harden and Kawhi Leonard are Hall of Famers. You could easily have a scenario where one of those 2 guys or both goes off, wins at Minnesota or at Golden State in a 1-game winner-take-all in the play-in tournament, and gets the 7 seed, then you're playing the Clippers. So that's a factor to consider as well. And the Rockets are 3-0 against the Clippers this year. That looks like a very good matchup, with Houston's athleticism giving them a lot of problems. So it's still somewhat conditional for me based on exactly who is in each slot. But the more the Rockets win home games, and the more I think about the advantages of being on the opposite side of the bracket from OKC, there might be a benefit to them being aggressive and trying to, hold on to ideally the 2 seed, but at least a top 3 seed. By the way, it'd be cool to get another division title. Rockets only had 8 in franchise history, none since that 2019 to 2020 team, which was also the last Rockets team to make the playoffs. If you win the division, it inherently means you're ahead of Memphis. It helps you out with tiebreakers, because in situations where there's a split, like there is with Minnesota, then division winner is one of the first ties. So yeah, add another line to that division titles banner in Toyota Center. Get yourself home court advantage in at least 1, probably 2 rounds, because if you're ahead of Memphis, you're probably going to be in the top 4. Good chance you're 2nd or 3rd like you are now. There's a lot to think about. Again, more on that later in the month, just something to sort of keep your eyes peeled for as you're watching these other games around the NBA. Anyway, as far as guys that have stood out to me the past week, and especially this bizarre game against Philly, Jalen to me is obviously the headliner, but the other guy that I think deserves his flowers is Jabari Smith Jr., who against the Sixers was just brilliant. 30 points off the bench. He was the guy who it felt like in the fourth quarter, every time the Rockets were on the verge of it getting away from them, made a big shot to where they stayed just close enough to have a chance. And then ultimately the Rockets went on that 10-2 run in the final minute of regulation, got it to overtime, and the rest is history. And of course, Jabari, beyond making all the threes, I believe he had 5 in total, also that ridiculously good missed free throw. That was incredible. I'd say that's the best missed free throw in team history. But I think another angle with Jabari, and Paolo alluded to this on one of our recent pods, there's a case to be made that he's a better player off the bench because his role is more simplified. And the numbers bear that out. It's still a small sample, but entering Wednesday, he's played 39 games as a starter, averaging 11.8 points, 6.7 rebounds in 31 minutes, 41.3% shooting, 34.6% on threes, plus minus a plus 2.5. In 8 games as reserve, he's averaging 14.3 points, 6.8 rebounds in 30 minutes. So more points, more rebounds, even in slightly reduced minutes, and way better efficiency. 51.2% shooting, 36.6% on threes, plus minus of plus 7.9. And it's very intriguing. You can see that Ime Udoka is emphasizing this because even in this stretch with Amen Thompson out, the Rockets have made it a point to start Tari Eason, I believe, because of the consistency of role argument. That, Tari is someone, and I used the phrase, he does what he does earlier. I think I said it on the last pod as well. He's going to play the way he plays regardless of the role. And he's also a fairly close analog to Amen Thompson in terms of how he plays with the other 4 starters. Jabari is someone who, depending on how a game is going for him and who he's playing alongside, you can often see very different versions of him. And so I think the Rockets want to get him into a routine. And I think what changes for Jabari when he comes off the bench, he looks to be much more assertive offensively. It looks like he knows where he fits within the pack. And even though in these bench units, yeah, I know sometimes he's still playing alongside a lot of the starters. And, Jalen did a great job, I thought, getting Jabari going against the Sixers with the pick and roll game, going downhill a few times. But generally, the way it works in the NBA, your 6th man, when he comes in midway through the first and third quarters, even if he's playing alongside a few starters, that 6th man sort of takes the keys of the offense because it's understood that a lot of those starters, even if they're still out there, their legs are a little tired because they've been playing for a while, whereas the 6th man is more fresh. And so Jabari goes out there and he's more aggressively hunting his offense. And that's the untapped potential in year 3 at 21 years old. He's already done a lot, Jabari that is, defensively. And in terms of rebounding, you can look at the on-off splits. You can look at the 6 weeks he missed while injured earlier this year and see just how valuable he is on those ends of the court. It's offense. It's that end where there are games where he's really good, and there's games where it feels like he just transitions to a secondary role and it's just camped out in the corner or on the wing. And, some of the good games, which is bad games, comes down to, does the ball go in the bucket? That's always true to an extent. But with Jabari, beyond that, it's also a matter of confidence. It's a matter of feeling empowered. And for whatever reason, when he plays alongside the starters, if he gets going early in a game, then yeah, the Rockets will feed him and you can see his confidence grow. But if he has a bad start, you often see him retreat into the background and give more usage reps to guys like Jalen and Sengun and Fred now that he's back, and Amen once Amen comes back, or Dylan even. By the way, Dylan had 25, 5 and 5 for the first time in his NBA career against the Sixers. He's had such a good shooting season. That's been a big part of how the Rockets have survived this stretch where they're getting back to their top 5 defense now. But earlier this year, when the injuries hit, it was a struggle defensively. They weren't what they've been for the season overall, and they simply shot well enough to overcome it. Dylan was a big part of that, and he did the same on Monday, where for various reasons, the Rockets certainly did not defend like a top 5 unit against the Sixers, giving up 88 points in the first 26 minutes of the game. But led by guys like Dillon Brooks, they shot well enough, made enough threes to stay in it. And then finally, down the stretch of the game, they had enough plays, not just offensively, but defensively as well, to get to the finish line. Anyway, this is meant to be about Jabari, and how this all ties into him. A lot of the time when he's playing alongside those starters, he can be deferential. Well, when he comes off the bench, certainly he's the best player from an offensive and creation standpoint amongst the guys that comes off the bench. But beyond that, even in the minutes where he's with the starters, because he's a little bit fresher and it's a new look for the opposing defense, it's understandable that you'll give Jabari some more touches. And it just looks like to me that he is a much more confident player in this six-man role. Now, I'm not saying it's going to be anything permanent. Again, just 21 years old, year 3. It may be that in a year or two, he's much more secure in who he is as a player. He has his footing in the league. He's a clear above average player. And this is all a non-issue because he knows who he is. But right now, he's still establishing his value alongside a lot of players on the Rockets who, Houston may not have any proven great players at this point, but they have a lot of proven good ones. And so when you have a lot of guys at similar points in their careers who all respect each other's abilities, it can be difficult. It can be a fine line to walk between wanting to give yourself enough opportunities to, have the sample size even out, eventually get some shots to fall, get some momentum, while also giving your teammates a chance to get going and perhaps ride the hot hand that gives you or may give you a better shot to win a given game in a playoff race where every game matters. It's a very fine line to walk. And even if the Rockets aren't super deep from the standpoint of, they are playing 10, 11 guys, no, in terms of the rotation, it's a pretty consistent 8 or 9. But when you look at who's doing the heavy lifting, especially on the offensive end of the court, it's not like there's a clear 1A or even 1B. There's a lot of variance. And so I think with Jabari, he's someone, because his profile isn't as on ball as someone like Jalen or Sengun, it's easier for him to sort of retreat into the background and not do everything that he's capable of doing, especially if he's just not feeling like this is his night. As opposed to when he's the sixth man, it looks like he's more empowered. Like he has no choice but to come out and be aggressive because that's what the role needs. And I think it plays into bringing out the best version of Jabari Smith Jr. because, again, the defense is there no matter what. The impact on rebounding is there no matter what. The untapped potential for Jabari with this team is about the offensive end of the court. And again, it's hard to put my finger on exactly why. I think it's probably a combination of things. But it just feels like for right now, the six-man role is it for him. It brings out the best version. I think Ime Udoka clearly sees it. That's why it's been Tari filling in for men and not Jabari in the starting lineup. And that doesn't mean Jabari's going to be a six-man for his career. It could be just, a perfect storm set of circumstances at 21 years old in year 3 and alongside a pretty deep team in Houston of good players, but without any great players, all trying, or most of them trying, at least in terms of the young core, to establish their footing and prove who they are. This may be a non-issue in a year or two. But for right now, for this particular team, the sample size is getting to a point where at 8 games and counting, I think sixth-man Jabari is probably the best version of Jabari. And so kudos to the Rockets for having the vision over the All-Star break. I'm sure they had some hard conversations internally about with Jabari coming back from injury, Fred coming back from injury, and then playing so well, what's going to make the most sense? It looks like to me they made the right choice of bringing Jabari off the bench because this is just a much better version of Jabari offensively. This is the area of untapped potential for him. And so I'm happy for Jabari that he's gotten going, but I also think it speaks well of the Rockets that I think they anticipated a lot of this. And through 8 games, not a massive sample, but not an insignificant one either, it seems to be playing out very favorably. Now, closing thoughts. Most of the spot has been positive because, look, they've won 7 straight games. And a couple of your young prospects who've taken a lot of criticism, Jalen Green and Jabari Smith Jr., have taken leaps over this stretch and are looking really good. So I think it's natural that most of the discussion is going to be positive. The vibes are immaculate right now. But the one bit of cold water I'll throw, you are seeing that this Rockets team does not have the clear A1. Their success without Amen Thompson, their success without Alperen Sengun against the Sixers, those are the closest things to proven stars that the Rockets have. I know it's been a weaker stretch of the schedule, but Amen Thompson is probably their best player, and the Rockets just went 5-0 in a week without him, even with some tired legs. Alperen Sengun was an all-star this year, and yet The Rockets just overcame a 25-point deficit mostly without him. That should show you that this team, and, it speaks well to the depth. There's a lot of good players who can step up on a given night, but it also should remind you that there's not that clear A1. And so for right now, it's fine. You're stacking wins. They're proving they can win in different ways. Maybe it makes them a more difficult scout in the playoffs. That's good. And perhaps Jalen is turning into something closer to that A1. That's the hope. Not nearly there yet as far as the sample, but, we can hope. But if the playoff run goes poorly, this is something that will remind you that even the best players on this team, we get excited by them, and we should be, especially given how young they are. But Sengun's not a perfect player. Amen's not a perfect player. The Rockets are still able to win without them. And, it's good in that it speaks to the depth of good players on this team. But I think it also speaks to the fact that this team doesn't have anything close to, at least historically, what you need at the NBA level to contend for a championship, which is a top 10, top 15 level player. The production of the Rockets, even when these guys are out of the lineup, should show you that while good, they're flawed. There's a reason why the Rockets have not had a huge decline in their efficiency on either end of the court when these guys aren't out there. And so I think that's mostly good. But the one small bit of cold water that I will throw on this is that it's a reminder that, hey, while you have a lot of good players, none of them are great players yet. And maybe the Rockets are an outlier. Maybe the Rockets, this approach of sometimes me, sometimes you, always us. Maybe it works in the playoffs, or maybe somebody takes their game to a new level. That's the whole point of getting to the playoffs and stress testing these young guys under the bright lights and seeing what happens. But if it goes poorly, and it might because they're young, it can also be a reminder that while there's a lot of good players, there's not, at least not yet, a great player or anything close to that. And so that might be the type of thing that prompts you to be a little bit more aggressive in off-season trade talks should a really proven all-star or all-NBA level player come available. Don't know who that would be. Don't know that it will happen. And hopefully the Rockets go out and have, not just a strong end to the regular season, but a strong playoff run to the point where we're looking at guys like Sengun or Amen or Jalen and saying, hey, we don't need to go externally for a big move because we feel like they're on the right track. There's still plenty of time. We're talking about guys that are 22, 23 years old. But the one, it's glass half full, glass half empty. The glass half full way is, man, the Rockets are winning games even with these guys out or playing poorly or having a bad matchup. But there's also a glass half empty way you can look at it, which is that the fact that the Rockets are able to win these types of games even without or with limited versions of some of the closest things to stars on this roster should tell you that, at least right now, they're not really stars. And so if the playoffs go poorly, and if the right player comes available in the offseason, that might be something you have to think about, depending on, of course, age, contractual alignment. There's a lot of factors. We can talk about that more in the offseason. But historically, you tend to need at least one top 10, top 15 level player to get to that championship level. I don't think the Rockets have anything close to that on the roster right now. That's not to say that they don't have players on the roster that could become that in time. There's absolutely hope for that. But I think the performances without Amen, the ability to succeed without Sengun, and of course they've succeeded without Jalen, although it seems like he's becoming a more indispensable part of the formula as the season progresses. It tells you that there is some growing, at least in terms of that all-NBA level, still to go. And so that's something to just sort of keep in the back of your mind as you go down the home stretch of the season, get to the playoffs. If things go poorly, and if the right player comes available in the offseason, this might be a stretch that you look back on and say, this is a reminder of, while the team overall is certainly very good, there's a lot of depth, there's a lot of quality players up and down the roster, none of them are to that level or anything close just yet to where they can carry the team. And perhaps that's something the Rockets have to look externally to get. I hope that's not the case. Just saying it's something to keep in the back of your mind. Anyway, that's where I'll wrap things for today. And if you want more content before our next show, the best place to get it is online. Of course, you can follow me on Twitter or X at Ben DuBose. Got my lovely officiating rants every game. As they get more meaningful, I'm sure you can expect more of those. And of course, this show at The Logger Line, where if you go to the Logger Line's page, on Twitter/X. You can find our link tree, which has links to our distribution partners like Apple, Google, and Spotify. If you'd be kind enough to subscribe, leave a positive review at your location of choice, we would greatly appreciate that. And also on that same link tree, you can find links to friends, sponsors, partners of the program, USA Today's Rockets Wire, Carbach Brewing, Sports Talk 790. Hit up those links and you can enjoy their content as well. All right, with those plugs complete, I will adjourn for today. Appreciate you guys as always for listening, and please come back soon for another new episode of The Logger Line.